Despite the fact that many teens are known to create trouble and give their parents a lot of problems, some teenagers have taken violence and criminal activity to a whole nother level, performing acts that you would only see in horror movies. Join us today as we go over the top 15 most violent teens reacting to a life sentence behind bars. Number 1. Damon Kemp. Damon, a 19-year-old, was charged with murdering his teenage friends and given a life sentence with no parole. When he was taken into the courtroom for his bond appointment, his reaction brought amusement to everyone, especially to the relatives of all those people that he killed. Everyone was nervous, emotional, and almost all were crying for their lost ones. Nerissa Carter, a mother of one of the victims, was overwhelmed with tears, causing her to leave the stands. She had lost her 19-year-old son, Trey Ingram, a popular kid among his friends and a member of the football team. Her sorrows had become so immense that she had to temporarily leave the courtroom, a situation that we wish no parent would ever have to experience. Damon's reaction in the courtroom caused worry and increased the dark and dim environment. When the judge decided to finalize all documents and sentence him, Damon went insane, screaming and yelling belligerently at the top of his lungs. Damon then calmed down, but all of a sudden began staring at the judge with threatening eyes, as if he was going to do something to her. It was as if Damon was trying to intimidate the judge. He then began moving his head from side to side, mimicking the behavior of a snake's head. His emotions, clearly unstable, did not help calm all the relatives of the hurt victims in the stands. As a response, the judge had no compassion for Damon, immediately denying his bail. The judge claimed there was more than enough reasons for his detainment. The police report stated that Damon was charged with an armed home robbery that subsequently led to a double homicide, although they never figured out the intentions behind the burglary. The end result was a family torn apart. Number 2. Philip Schism. In 2013, a crime scene so obscure and disturbing took place that a whole community was left disturbed. Philip, a freshman at Danvers High School in Massachusetts, followed his teacher into a bathroom stall, viciously strangled her, and stabbed her almost 17 times. It was a crime that left millions across the United States disturbed. Worse than anything else, Philip was only 14 years of age when this happened, and his teacher 24. Everyone was stunned for Colleen Ritzer, as she was an extremely loving and charismatic teacher. She had the reputation of always helping her students and caring for them as if they were her own children. The surveillance camera shows us that when class had ended, Philip sneakily followed his teacher into the bathroom and brutally murdered her. Fortunately, due to modern-day technology, he was being recorded by school cameras. As we can see here, he is fleeing the scene. But just like many low IQ criminals, when police raided his home the following day, he still had the blood of his heinous crimes on his clothes, leading to an almost 100% conviction in court, as evidence showed her DNA was all over his body. The following events would lead to permanent consequences. The judge gave Philip a life sentence behind bars with a slight chance of parole after 25+ years. The intention of this harsh sentence was to make sure he would never forget the harm that he has bestowed upon society. The jury and the families of all those that were affected just wept with tears of devastation. As for Philip, he stood still frozen with no emotions. When the Colleen family had a chance to speak out during trial, her father Tom stated that it is his biggest regret that he was not there to defend his daughter. "I didn't protect Colleen. A dad's job is to fix things," he said. I would do anything I could if I could fix this for Colleen. Number 3. Jacob Mather Morgan. A 17-year-old just broke down in court when the judge sentenced him to 15 years behind bars. On March of the year 2015, he had committed arson, creating a fire which led to his 1-year-old brother Joshua burning alive. Fortunately, his family stood behind him like a rock, repeatedly stating he was not at fault, the perfect example of parents loving their children. His mother, Julie Dover, stated that Jacob was trying to enter their house to actually save the 1-year-old, but in a twist of fate, his own neighbors physically stopped him, telling him that the flames will kill you. But when news reports emerged, everyone was confused as the story didn't make sense. In a private 6-hour interview, Jacob actually admitted to starting the fire when he said that he threw a pillow at a radiator furnace. Then, in a later part of the interview, he changed his version of the story, admitting that he accidentally set a cushion on fire and threw it around, leaving the jury and the judge confused, not knowing which story to believe. When the fire department went to do their own investigations, they came to the conclusion that 2 different fires had been started. One in the television room and another in the baby's room when the infant was taking a nap. Unfortunately, the investigation team didn't help, as they convinced the jury that Jacob was some sort of pyromaniac, having been fascinated by how fires work, lighting one 2 weeks prior on the same property premises. In a testimony obtained by officers, Jacob admitted that he did in fact have an abnormal fascination for fires, especially candles. Number 4. Roxana Sikorski. Roxana received a 10-year sentence behind bars for orchestrating an evil plan that would see her stab her younger brother in the throat. In 2014, after years of abuse, her boyfriend, a 24-year-old man she met on Facebook, manipulated her to go to her brother's room and attempt to kill him. Everyone in the court was tense as her mother and father begged the judge for compassion. Her parents stated to the court that our daughter is not a bad person, but has gone through emotional turmoil all throughout her youth. When the evidence was shown to the judge, findings showed that Roxana was abused all throughout her childhood, as well as being an adopted foster kid from Poland. Roxana told the judge that her boyfriend would sexually assault her and that he was a master manipulator. It was him that convinced me my family did not love me and for me to take all of their lives. Prosecutors made sure that Roxana was well aware of the consequences of her plea deal and that if charged, there would be no turning back. Her mother was worried about her and questioned if the prosecutors really had her daughter's best interest when trying to convince her to plead guilty. Roxana's lawyer requested an appeal to the court's decision as it was unlawful because of her age, especially for her to be charged as an adult. When the judge sentenced her for almost a decade behind bars, Roxana broke down in tears, losing all emotional control. Her lawyer stated to the judge and jury members that Roxana was mentally damaged as all of her actions stemmed from years of abuse originating from her foster home in Poland, all mixed with never receiving any real love and care in her life. All Roxana had to say was, "I would like to apologize to my family for not being the daughter they wished I would be, and I promise I will get better no matter what happens." Number 5. Jaleel Riley. In the year 2003, Jaleel had murdered a young lady and brutally created multiple injuries to her spouse. This led him to receiving a life sentence behind bars. The relatives of the victims were greatly hurt by these turn of events, both showing anger and sorrow to the judge. They stated the sentencing was both not enough and demanded a much harsher sentence to the judge. When the judge re-evaluated his final sentencing statements, Jaleel fainted and dropped to the floor, in spite of the fact that Jaleel requested for his attorney to reverse his guilty plea and stop the final death penalty sentence. The prominent judge, Charles Becky, completely ignored the request and pushed for a maximum sentence. It was as though Judge Becky had no pity for the criminal. Jaleel's family took the stand and begged the judge for leniency and solicitude, stating that our son is a good kid with no criminal history in the past. They pleaded for hours to the judge, but in the end, he stood firm on his decision. Vice versa, on the other end of the spectrum, the family members of the deceased took the stands and demanded with anger that the judge give the defendant the harshest sentence the law would allow. The mother of the deceased, on the other hand, had mixed feelings when addressing the court. On one hand, she asked for a severe and harsh sentencing as her daughter's existence had been stolen from them. But on the other hand, she stated that this disaster had greatly impacted her family, but it was now time for them to peacefully move on. Obviously, she came to terms that their daughter is in heaven watching over them. Jaleel's attorney then said that this was the first time in history that they have seen a defendant of theirs take back their guilty plea. Realizing the level of consequence that followed with the sentence, as the police officers slowly walked Jaleel out of the county courthouse, he was downhearted with sorrow and regret. He didn't resist, nor was he acting disrespectful to the judge, but it was clear he was hit with a ton of bricks, realizing that he would never spend a day outside of his jail cell ever again. At the same time, when the victim's family members visually saw the judicial sentencing being finalized, it was a prominent stepping stone to receiving the final needed closure to amending all of the hurt that Jaleel had bestowed upon their family. Number 6. Jennifer Mee. Born in 1991 in St. Petersburg, Florida. This murderer was nicknamed by the media as Mrs. Hiccup, appearing on multiple TV shows all over the world for her world record of hiccuping 50 times a minute. Unfortunately, she was sentenced to life behind bars for first-degree murder of young 21-year-old man she met online. She invited the man to her home, but in a turn of events, 2 of her friends robbed the man of $50 and shot him 4 times with a .38 caliber handgun, killing him on the spot. When the judge sentenced Jennifer, she immediately broke down in tears, realizing the wicked and heinous crime she had performed that very night. But this is the part of the story that gets interesting. The family members of the deceased victim began to cry when they saw Jennifer suffering with tears, and many of them even left the courtroom. It was a sight never before seen in history. Jennifer's mother then took the stand, appealing the judge's final decision. She stated that it was not my daughter who shot the victim, nor was she the one with the gun. She begged and begged for him to reconsider, but the judge stood firm on his final verdict. By this time, it was too far into the court case, and the district attorney had already convinced the jury that it was Jennifer that orchestrated the murder. And worse than anything else, she convinced others to join in on her evil scheme. Jennifer obviously anticipated a more modest sentencing, but rather the American judicial system thought different. The judge then went even further to giving her no possibility of parole. When Jennifer heard this, she broke down even more. Her facial expressions just shined misery and despair, as there wasn't even a 1% chance she would ever leave prison. The man's mother, Shanna, spoke to media outlets expressing her hurt, as she would never again see her son. She also stated that today justice was served. And even though the process was excruciatingly difficult, justice won at the end of the day. Number 7. Siandel Jackson. Siandel brutally assaulted Nathan Potter, a young man in his 20s, with a gun, causing him to slowly pass. The incident originated when Siandel was trying to rob Nathan, but quickly things went sour. Worse than anything else, Nathan did not have any money at the time of the robbery, as the whole incident was a waste of time for Siandel. When the judge heard the final verdicts, he decided to give Siandel a life sentence behind bars. To make matters worse, the judge was outraged with the details and even stated to the people in the stands there would be no possibility of parole either. The defendant's family then broke down with emotions, begging for Siandel's attorney to ask the judge to reconsider. His attorney asked the judge to have compassion, as his client was a young-age teenager with no control over his wild emotions. Then the court became as dramatic as a movie when Siandel's family members lost all emotional control with tears and anger, having to be escorted out. On the other hand, Nathan's family sat there as each and every one of them hugged each other, crying with tears of misery. They stated to the jury that our brother was a leader, a man of nothing more than love in his heart, and he cared for us each and every second of his life. And lastly, David Myers. A Buffalo, New York resident, 19-year-old David was charged with aggressively beating a man, grimly killing his dog, and then horrifically setting his home on fire. He stood upright and confident in front of Judge Burns. His defense lawyer said that my client is going to be 100% collaborative with the court, and in no way will he hide any of his actions. David calmly confessed to investigators of arson, even stating that I started a fire in the home of a 52-year-old gentleman, Brian Dominic. He slowly acknowledged the fact that he is responsible for everything that has happened that day, and as well compassionate remorse for all the hurt that he has caused. I know I cannot travel back in time to change the course of events that took place, but if I could, I would change all of actions I have completed. Nonetheless, he was humbled to realize his wish was purely impossible. When the trial had taken place, prosecutors made it evident to the jury that a huge argument took place between David and the deceased man. Prosecutors said Mr. Dominic was stating racist remarks about the people of Jewish race to David, and this greatly hurt David as he had many family members who were Holocaust victims. Thus, the reasoning behind the cruel arson becoming obvious. When the ritual had come to an end, Judge Burns had no sympathy for David, giving him a life sentence behind bars. David immediately fought for a lighter sentence, as sadness and guilt took over his emotions. David said, "I am extremely sorry that I did this. I apologize to Brian's family. There's nothing I can fix. If it was possible to go back and make up for what I did, I would." He knew that this sentencing would give him no hope of a future, asking the judge to have sympathy for him. The judge, although wanted to make an example out of him, and stated that the 20 years for second-degree murder and another 15 years for third-degree arson was a fair and just sentencing. If you liked this video and want to be blown away with excitement each and every week with new videos, please subscribe and always keep that inner light bulb in your heart enlightened.